They would often stop by whenever Scott wasn't home and call me every degrading and insulting name they knew of.
Barren Black Witch? What? Did you lose your womb while sleeping around? Or did you trade it for money with your black witchcraft?
Ma'am, you're being unfair to me. Scott has told you we're both fine medically. I didn't trade my womb for nothing. How can you even say that?
You're not fine if you're still unable to have a child since 2 years you've been married to my son. You have nothing to say, young lady.
After they left, I would remain in my room and nearly cry my eyes out. I felt so unhappy. Hello, everyone. My name's Anna. I'm originally from Uganda, but I relocated to Italy around the time I was about 12 years old. I'm 32 now, and I'm married to Scott, an Italian man I met way back in college. Scott and I were in the same class, and he immediately stood out to me. He had this easygoing charm and a distinctive Italian accent that made him quite different from anyone else around. I remember the first time he spoke to me. He was asking for help with a project we were both working on. His genuine curiosity and the way he listened made me feel instantly at ease. As weeks went by, we began to see each other more often. We'd sit together in class, study together, and even grab coffee between lectures. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. Scott had a knack for making me laugh and feel comfortable, which was something I hadn't experienced before. One evening, as we walked through the campus park, Scott confessed that he'd developed feelings for me. I felt the same way, so we decided to give dating a try. Our relationship grew naturally from there, filled with shared interests, laughter, and deep conversations. It felt like we had known each other for much longer than we actually had. When it came time for Scott to meet my family, I was a bundle of nerves. My family is very traditional, and I hoped they'd be open to him. Scott, however, was wonderful. He made a real effort to understand our culture and traditions. He asked questions, listened intently, and even learned a few words of my native language. The moment Scott stepped into our home, he was greeted with warmth. My parents were impressed by his respect and eagerness to fit in. They saw how happy he made me, and how he genuinely cared for our family. It didn't take long for them to see what I saw in him and to welcome him with open arms. Scott's effort to embrace my background and his genuine nature won over everyone. It was clear that he wasn't just interested in me, but in becoming a part of my world. That made all the difference and solidified our bond. The first time I met Scott's parents, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. I hoped they'd see me the way Scott did, but it didn't take long for things to go wrong. As soon as I walked through the door, Scott's mother's eyes widened in shock. She looked me up and down, her face contorting with disbelief.
What? A black woman? Scott, are you crazy? How could you think of marrying a black lady?
Her voice was sharp and filled with disdain. Scott's father wasn't any better. He stood there, arms crossed, shaking his head.
Honestly, I'm very disappointed in you. A black lady?
I felt my cheeks flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Scott, however, was quick to defend me.
You're both being unfair to her. What does being black mean? She's human just like us.
His voice was firm, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, but the weight of the situation left me feeling speechless. Before I could say a word, Scott's mother turned to me with a scowl.
Just leave, Blackie. We don't want you here. We do not approve of you, and we never will.
I felt my heart sink as tears welled up in my eyes. I knew I had to leave, but it was hard to hold back the sobs as I walked out of their home. The drive back was a blur of emotions, sadness, humiliation, and a sense of deep disappointment. The next day, Scott came to me with an apologetic expression.
Anna, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I know how hurtful it was. I've talked to them, and they're ready to apologize. Please, can we try again? They need to understand how wrong they were.
I hesitated, but Scott's sincerity convinced me to give it another chance. A week later, I found myself standing at Scott's parents' door once more, hoping for a better outcome. When I walked in, I was met with a more subdued atmosphere, but the tension was palpable. However, the moment Scott's parents learned about my background, their demeanor changed drastically.
So you come from a poor background?
I suppose you've had to make do with less, haven't you? Did you also sleep with Italian men for money to live here?
His tone was condescending, filled with judgment. The comments stung deeply. Scott tried to intervene, but the damage was already done. Their prejudices were clear, and no amount of apology seemed to change their attitudes. I could feel my composure breaking. I looked at Scott, seeing the pain in his eyes, but the harsh words from his parents had already cut through me. I knew that no matter how much Scott loved me, their views were something I couldn't easily change. Leaving their home for the second time, I felt a heavy weight on my shoulders, realizing that their acceptance was something I might never fully have. Well, Scott and I both came to an agreement to push through with our relationship without his parents' approval. My family felt sad about the refusal to accept me, but didn't let that change how they felt for Scott. With that, we began to prepare for our wedding. Scott's brother wasn't like his parents. He assisted us in every way he could and even asked to be Scott's best man. On the day of the wedding, shockingly, Scott's parents came. They sat at the back of the hall and refused to smile, but I was still happy that they showed up. It meant they cared about their son. They vehemently refused to take any pictures with us, no matter how Scott or his brother tried to beg them. We let them be and simply enjoyed our wedding. After the wedding came another problem. 2 years after our wedding, and we were still struggling to have a child. We'd gone to different hospitals to see countless doctors, but all test results showed that we didn't have any issues medically. I wouldn't have been so worried if Scott's parents didn't constantly ring it in my ears that I was a barren witch. Yes. 1 year after our wedding, they'd both apologized to us, but that didn't mean they liked me. They simply apologized so they could mend their relationship with Scott. They would often stop by whenever Scott wasn't home and call me every degrading and insulting name they knew of.
Barren Black Witch? What? Did you lose your womb while sleeping around? Or did you trade it for money with your black witchcraft?
Ma'am, you're being unfair to me. Scott has told you we're both fine medically. I didn't trade my womb for nothing. How can you even say that?
You're not fine if you're still unable to have a child since 2 years you've been married to my son. You have nothing to say, young lady.
After they left, I would remain in my room and nearly cry my eyes out. I felt so unhappy. But I couldn't tell Scott. I couldn't afford to make him fight with his parents again. Finally, after 5 long years of waiting, I got pregnant. My husband was overjoyed when he got the news. My family too, as well as Scott's brother. Everyone was happy for me except Scott's parents. They accused me of lying about my pregnancy. Even after Scott confirmed that we'd gone together, they refused to believe.
Who knows if she paid the doctor to lie? No one knows what these black, desperate women are capable of.
Scott nearly flared up in anger, but I managed to hold him back. I told my in-laws I was ready to have the test again in whatever hospital they chose. Embarrassingly for them, the result came out to prove that I was truly pregnant. They were so ashamed they hid from us for 3 whole months. On the day they finally visited us to apologize, Scott had to travel to a different country for work. They both volunteered to stay with me, since I was already 4 months pregnant. Scott was skeptical about it at first, but I assured him that I'd be fine. My in-laws brought some of their things and began living with me. Believe me when I say it was the toughest point of my life. They were both pure evil and would make me do things the doctor warned me against doing. My mother-in-law would make me cook countless times a day and end up throwing it in the bin.
Who knows? You might have poisoned that food with your poisonous eyes.
It was so painful to watch the meal I spent hours preparing being thrown into the bin, but I couldn't do anything about it. In the morning, she would wake me up with a bucket of icy water. She would yell at me for being a lazy wife and not waking up early when it was only just 4 a.m. I did her laundry with my bare hands because she prohibited me from using the machine. I never complained.
I heard black women wash with their hands. Scott has pampered you too much. How can he make you use the machine when you have your ugly hands?
Even the times when she made me wash every single clothing item she brought with her on an empty stomach, I didn't complain. I began to grow lean, and even Scott noticed it one night while we were having a video call. I lied to him about being stressed from the pregnancy, and he apologized. I felt bad to hear him apologize for something he didn't do. My father-in-law wasn't any better. One day, after I accidentally added a little sugar to his tea, he asked me to hammer 50 nails slowly into a log of wood. By the time I was done, I was panting hard. As if that wasn't enough. One day, he spilled some of his steaming hot tea on my feet, claiming he didn't see me walking toward him. I was living a nightmare with those two. I wanted to get out of it as fast as possible, but I also knew I had to wait until Scott returned. Unfortunately, the day he returned, he met me in a bad state. I'd collapsed in the middle of helping my father-in-law with a very tedious task that even he couldn't do. Scott was so shocked when he came in and met his dad sitting cross-legged while I laid on the floor. Before saying anything to his dad, he picked me up and took us to our bedroom. After I woke up, I burst into tears and told him everything I'd been keeping away from him. Scott was so pissed that he stormed out of the room and went to the living room. There, he met both his parents. Before they could speak, he pounced on them. They received the beating of their lives from him before Scott dragged them to one of our empty rooms. There was no bed there or anything. He told them they'd be there until I gave birth, and only feed on whatever he gave them. I felt bad every time I opened the door to give them their meal. Their cries also touched me deeply. Scott has threatened to show videos of them mistreating me if they ever tried to contact the police. Apparently, he had installed cameras without our knowledge, and they recorded everything that happened when he wasn't home. This seemed to scare his parents even more. They were both there for 6 months. My father-in-law's beards were overgrown, and his wife looked so tattered. Scott forced them to take care of me and our daughter after I gave birth. They did all the house chores, cooked, etc. I was impressed with their new behavior. After a while, they apologized for all their past actions and promised to do better. I forgave them and they burst into cries. I couldn't help but hug them. Ever since, they've both been nothing but good people. I guess Scott beating and locking them up was just the perfect punishment they deserved. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.